Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to play a game of Dune Imperium Rise of Ix, the digital version, for you and just kind of walk you through what it looks like. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic, and it just came out, and this is going to be my second game of it now that I understand the interface, and I'm going to walk you through kind of how to play it and what the digital version looks like. So first up, there's going to be some new characters. I went ahead and I chose one of the new characters. Next up, there's going to be a bunch of additional game mechanics that I'll be talking about over the course of this video. There's a shipping track. There's going to be dreadnoughts, which is a combat unit. It's an awesome combat unit. And then finally, there's new technologies. So the character that I picked to play the game, he has the ability to pull the top two entry cards from the top of the deck, and you get to pick one. So I went ahead and I picked the Windfall entry card. That's going to give me 2 Solari. And so something I want to do is kind of test drive the Dreadnought. So I'm going to try to get some money and then maybe buy a Dreadnought so I can show you all how that works out. I think Dreadnoughts are amazing, especially if you get one super early in the game. You can just abuse the other players with it because you can recycle it over and over again. It gives you a pretty hefty advantage. So I'm going to try to get a Dreadnought if I can early on in the game. I don't think it's going to be a problem because nobody else has any Solari. You can have a maximum of 2 Dreadnoughts in the game, and there's only one space and location on the board. Notice it's at the top sort of right-hand quadrant of the screen, and it's going to cost you 3 Solari to get one. But once you get the Dreadnought, it will just keep cycling back and forth to your garrison. So as you can see, it already now is in my garrison, and it's ready to be deployed. Anytime you can deploy a troop, you can deploy a Dreadnought instead. Something else I'm looking at is my character. To activate his signet ring, I'm going to have a spice in reserve. Otherwise, it's not going to trigger. And if I do have that spice in reserve, it's going to help me with the shipping track, which is pretty cool. So later on, as we start getting deeper into the game, I'm going to show you how that works. Rise of Ix also has a significant number of new cards for you to play and put into your deck. Absolutely fantastic. It makes every game unique, and what I like about it, there's different types of strategies that you can start implementing as you start going through it, and there's going to be some additional mechanics actually in those cards as well, and as they pop up, I'll try to walk you through what those all mean. If you know, I am a Dune fanatic. I love playing all the Dune board games, so if you want to see like a deeper rule dive, I have a board game version where I walk you through Rise of Ix. You can go ahead and check that out on my channel. So notice that the battlefield objective has that you can win sort of perks and benefits on the shipping track. So if you see the first position actually on that, that's kind of an interesting reward, and that kind of highlights some of the changes in the game mechanics in Rise of Ix. Even the conflicts are going to be different, and the rewards for the conflicts are going to be different. So in this case, I think I mentioned it sort of last turn, I want to have a little bit of spice in reserve, because now I have my signet ring, and I want to make sure that I can utilize my signet ring. It's going to cost me 1 spice every time I activate it, so I'm just kind of giving myself a little bit of a bank of spice so I can go ahead and start using my signet ring appropriately. Notice too, I placed my Dreadnought into the battlefield after I collected spice. Since it is a combat location, I was able to move my Dreadnought out into the playing field. So now I have 5 points in the combat arena with just 2 units. I have 1 sort of foot soldier infantry, and then I have the Dreadnought, which is going to give me a little bit of an advantage. What I just popped open on the screen, those are going to be the technologies. And then I just went ahead and placed one of my agents on the shipping track. You can either advance or you can recall. If you advance, you go up the track 1 position. If you recall, it takes your marker all the way back to the bottom, and then you get to utilize all of those different rewards. Now, I went ahead and I used my signet ring to go 2 spaces up the shipping track, because I think that that would be a nice advantage. So if I ever recall, then I get 2 ranks of rewards instead of just 1. And so, like in general, I would recommend that the further you go up that shipping track, it can give you some nice rewards. The red player just went up and then went down the shipping track. So they got 2 icons, went up and then immediately back down, and they cashed in to gain either that Solari or that spice. So back to the reveal phase, which is then going to lead us into the combat phase. Especially at the beginning of the game, where there's a really limited number of cards that people have in their decks. And also, too, they're not going to have a ton of intrigue cards as well. That's going to give you a nice advantage on the battlefield by just simply having 1 Dreadnought. So having a 5 attack kind of early on is not a big deal. And so I was able to win that conflict. Now notice I get 2 movement on the shipping track. So this is going to be great. I can then go up on the shipping track and then immediately go all the way down, essentially. And also, too, since I won, my Dreadnought is going to park on Arakeen, that location. Now you can see the token sitting there. Since I went to the top of the shipping track, I go all the way to the bottom and I can execute any of those rewards in any order. So I went ahead and just grabbed a bunch of Solari. I can also grab a faction. And then I'm going to get a couple of infantry. And now I can choose a tech at a discounted rate. So techs are going to cost spice. So in this case, the tech is going to be at -2. And this is crazy. Restricted ordnance is absolutely obscene to get. If you notice what that said is anytime you do a reveal phase, you add 4 combat markers. So that means from now on, anytime I have a combat and I have a troop in the conflict, I get a +4 to attack. That with the Dreadnought is an extremely potent combination, and that's going to give me a huge advantage over the other players. Since I got that big boost in Solari, I went ahead and now purchased a seat at the High Council, which is going to be great. It's going to allow me to buy cards for cheaper, which is going to be fantastic. So I'm really kind of revving up my engine, and now that I'm seeing, hey, I have a huge advantage. If I just put 1 troop into the conflict with that tech card, that's going to give me a huge combat advantage over the other players. I'm going to start bullying them, therefore, with combat units. I want to make sure that over the course of this game, I maintain that superiority, and I keep really focusing on combat. Notice that the yellow player has also placed out a Dreadnought into the battlefield, so I have to be a little bit more careful. It's not typical that other players get them this soon, so this is kind of an interesting game, and it's kind of fun because now there's multiple Dreadnoughts already out. So a card I just placed out was able to remove troops from their garrison, so I'm now whittling away at their ability to fight with that card. So I'm going to favor cards from my draw deck that are really combat oriented or kind of mess up the other players in the combat arena. Notice another player just purchased a technology, so the techs are starting to build out on the table as well, which is pretty interesting. Looks like another player now has purchased a Dreadnought, so we got the red player with a Dreadnought, so things are starting to amp up quite a bit in the combat arena, which is pretty exciting. I'm definitely excited for the combat phase of this game round. Remember that I purchased that tech. It's going to give me a +4 attack, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. I can utilize that technological upgrade every single combat. It's going to give me just a massive advantage, which is going to be super cool. Notice I jumped from a 6 to a 10. That's going to be very difficult for my opponents to keep up with me while fighting, unless they're using a ton of intrigue cards, or if they have a ton of troops. So what makes it nice is my Dreadnought's going to be cycling back to my garrison this turn because it sat out on Arakeen this round. So notice at the end of this conflict and when the round resets, my Dreadnought's going to go back to my garrison, and then I can use it again. So by using that combat tech upgrade in conjunction with the Dreadnought, it's going to be fantastic. I really want to get another Dreadnought, so I should probably focus on that, but I also need to get my second agent out. So I really need to start building up a decent amount of money so I can buy both those upgrades and utilize them fully. So here we go. We just won the conflict. That's going to also net me an extra agent next round, which is going to be fantastic. So I'm basically going to have 3 on the subsequent turn. Got a little bit of Solari also out of it, and an additional entry card, which is great. So I have a lot of forward momentum in this game, and it's actually going pretty well. I really like the combat theme of this game, and it really underscores that when you do play Dune Imperium, try to look at every opportunity that's out on the board. So just having one strategy doesn't always work. And when you first start playing the game, you kind of gravitate towards stuff that has worked for you in the past. But just understand, it won't always work because the game is so variable. Depending on which cards are coming out onto the table and what you're putting into your deck, and really what your opponents are doing, can greatly change the dynamic of the game. So I used my extra agent to gain 2 Solari, which is fantastic. It also net me 1 victory point as well on the Imperial faction track. So now I have the ability to get my agent. Hopefully I can pull that agent. It looks like I'm going to be able to, because nobody has enough Solari to buy an agent before my next turn. Plus I have a green card. I have a dagger card that I can use to buy my additional agent. So this could be kind of a fun turn. Overall, I'm going to be able to have basically 4 agents over the course of this turn. Just want to make sure there's no other additional options that I should be looking at this point. I could potentially get an extra victory point if I spent my Solari, but I don't have to do that right now. So probably the best play is still getting that additional agent out onto the table. My last 2 agents I want to spend and put out onto the table to trigger that technology upgrade that I have. Also, too, I'm kind of lagging behind on victory points at this point in the game. I'm definitely not one of the league contenders. I have very strong infrastructure, but I don't really have a ton of victory points, so I want to make sure that I keep up with that. Currently on the battlefield, there's a 4 combat power, and then there's a 3 combat power. So I just want to make sure that I take this so I can gain that victory point. So when I go up to the shipping track, I'm going to move up 1 space on that. And then probably what I'm going to do on my last card is that I want to kind of place that out onto the battlefield and make sure that I'm putting troops out so I can get that +4 tech bonus upgrade. There's really no advantage for me playing either of these cards. I don't have a Fremen Bond at this point, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to throw my Dreadnought out. That's a reusable troop. I'm going to throw some additional troops out onto the table as well. Now we hit the reveal phase. I've got a 7 combat power. Once I hit reveal, it's going to jump to an 11, which it just did, which is fantastic. Going to buy my card, move on to the conflict. Highly unlikely that my opponents are going to overpower me. They just don't have a ton of entry cards, and even if they did, a lot of them aren't necessarily combat oriented, so I have a pretty good advantage over them. I'm most likely going to win. And I did win the conflict, get that victory point, and then I can go ahead and move on to the next round. The next conflict just came up on the screen, and I can increase 2 factions by 1 point. At this point in the game, I haven't really gone up the faction tracker all that much, so for me, that's going to be a fairly impactful conflict, so I should definitely keep my eyes out and really contemplate if I can get that victory as well. With my agent, and also, too, I have a seat on the High Council. Really, I don't need a ton of Solari to get another Dreadnought. I only need 2 Solari, so that might be a good play for me as well to kind of start looking at, hey, can I maybe get my additional Dreadnought out onto the table? And in this case too, my signet ring isn't very impactful because I don't have any spice to trigger its special ability. So even if I do play it, it's not going to give me all that much. But I can get some spice, and I can deploy on the same sort of turn. So by doing that, I can now activate my signet ring. In conjunction with that, I have a couple troops out on the table, which I can use my tech upgrade again at the end of the game round for the conflict. So that was a pretty good turn for me. At this stage, now that I have a little bit of spice, I can go ahead and play my signet ring. I just need one spice to activate it. So I think that would be a good option on my next turn. And really look at, hey, maybe I can get an extra Solari from the shipping track, or maybe even the additional Solari that I need to get my last Dreadnought. That might be a good option as well. So for here, I can go ahead and advance a recall, and I went ahead and advanced, and then I can go ahead and advance a recall right here. At this point, I don't want to go all the way off the track because I don't really feel like I need any of those tech upgrades. So it can net me a couple troops, which is going to be great. And then it's also going to net me a faction. And so something I'm lagging behind is on faction. So if I win the conflict in conjunction with this can give me the ability to potentially get 2 victory points at the end of the round. If I go with the Fremen and the Spacey Guild track, now I just picked up some Solari. That's going to give me enough to get my additional Dreadnought in a later turn. My opponents are starting to have a much stronger combat presence. So as an example, the red player now has a 9 combat score out on the table. So it's not as easy for me to overpower them as sort of like the middle of the game. Because a lot of my early game advantages are starting to dwindle because they're honestly just catching up to me. So I have to be a little bit more tactical when it comes to this. There's a block location, so I can use one of my intrigue cards to take that location. What's great about placing my agent on that space is I got a Solari, I also got an intrigue card, and I got an additional troop. So that was a really good combination of things for me to get that turn. Now I'm kind of basically in alignment with them. I also have a decent amount of Solari because I still have that intrigue card in reserve where I can spend 7 Solari to get a victory point. So really, I'm looking at, one more Dreadnought by the end of the game, and then spending that Solari on that victory point so I can start outpacing them on victory points. I'm still lagging a little bit behind overall on victory points. The tech upgrade that I purchased early on in the game is still giving me huge rewards. Having a 10 to a 9, that doesn't mean I'm going to win the conflict, but having an additional +4 coming from that tech upgrade, and that looks like I had a dagger as well, so I got a +5 combat bonus, so a 15 to a 9, that's a pretty decent amount to be over the other player. The red player passed, so I know that I'm going to win this conflict. Even if they did add an intrigue card, now I've got a couple cards in reserve that I can start bullying them with as well. So this is fantastic. I went ahead and won the conflict. Now I can gain 2 victory points by going down the Spacing Guild, and then if I do the Fremen as well, now I hit the tier 2 on both those tracks, which nets me 2 victory points, which is fantastic. So now I am finally in the lead for the first time this game, and now I want to keep that lead and just keep going. I have a pretty good chance of winning this game, I believe, at this point in time. At this point, I'm going to keep up the momentum. I don't want to drop off quite yet. I want to make sure that I maintain the initiative that I have over the other players. I don't have a huge lead. It's a small lead, so I just have to make sure I just keep going. Gurney is a fantastic card. Nets you a ton of troops, especially if you put it on a location like Arakeen. And you get another card draw as well. That's just a fantastic card overall. If you ever see Gurney, it's definitely worth purchasing. So once again, I got the Dreadnought and a couple troops in the mix, and I'm at a 7 attack, which is fantastic. And then something else I'm looking to do is get my second Dreadnought, and then in conjunction with that, I have the Intrigue card, which I can burn 7 Solari and gain a victory point. So those are 2 objectives that I really need to focus on over the next couple of turns. Obviously, I don't want to wait too long to get my Dreadnought, because then there's just basically no need to get it. If you wait till like turns 8 or 9, you don't get to just use it very much. So try to get Dreadnoughts early and utilize them all the way through the game. One of the things that I recommend for all players is get at least the first victory point for each of the 4 factions. That's going to net you 4 victory points over the course of the game. I don't yet have the Bene Gesserit sort of victory point for their faction track yet, so that's something that I can focus on over the next couple of turns and hopefully close that out by the end of the game as well. I always recommend at least doing those 4 points, and then if you get, you know, one of the trophies, one of the faction trophies, that's also good too, if you can swing it. Usually when you're playing the computer, they kind of outpace you when it comes to a lot of those trackers, so it's really difficult to get those while you're playing against the computer. Toward the last rounds of the game, it's always nice to have a stack of spice. Try to get it so you have, you know, about 6 spice. You want to be able to purchase the Highliner, and that's something always be aware of, is like, how much spice do your opponents have? So one of the computer-controlled opponents has 12 spice. If they win the initiative, there's a pretty good chance they can drop the Highliner card at the very beginning of the game round. So just be very aware of that you can be really under the gun when it comes to troop strength. If the player that wins the initiative drops the Highliner, that is a pretty difficult opening move to overpower. So always make sure that you have a decent amount of spice when you're going into the later rounds, so that when your turn does pop and you can buy the Highliner, you actually do that. A lot of those conflict cards toward the end of the game can net you 2 victory points, which is absolutely fantastic, and that's kind of what you need to really close out the game strong. Always be very aware of your reveal phase when you can potentially buy a Spice Must Flow card. Even if you get 1 or 2 over the course of the game, it's enough to kind of keep you, you know, sort of outpacing your opponents. So that's something that I was able to just get, is 1 Spice Must Flow card. Obviously, it's not the best card to put into your draw deck. It really doesn't do much of anything for you. You can get a spice from it. But that victory point and keeping ahead of your opponents is very, very critical. For my next turn, I have to be really careful. I now have 4 Intrigue cards, which means that one of them could be stolen, specifically when the next game round starts, if they just pull the Bene Gesserit position on the board where they can steal from you. So I just have to make sure that I may as well spend the card instead of losing it. And now I have enough Solari to cash in that 7 Solari for that 1 victory point, so I want to do that as soon as possible in conjunction with having a strong opening move. Unfortunately, I don't have enough for the Highliner, so it's going to be a little bit tough this round to gain those 2 victory points. I probably spent just way too many troops in the last sort of game round. I think it was just a little bit excessive. Plus, my Dreadnought is out on the map itself, blocking Carthage, so it's probably not the best choice that I made. I could have done that a little bit better in the last game round. But as long as I just continue to do things in a stepwise progression, I should be okay and still come out on top. So there I go. I just burned my Solari to get that extra victory point, which is great. Now, if anybody plays that Bene Gesserit space, I'm not going to lose an Intrigue card to them. There's kind of a weird board presence at this stage of the game. Nobody really has any infantry, and that's kind of surprising, specifically for basically game round number 7, where, you know, usually somebody has a decent amount of troops that they can start winning the conflict and getting those victory points. This is kind of unusual when it comes to sort of like the board positioning. I don't want to wait any longer for the Dreadnought, and in addition to that, I can look to see if I can get an additional tech card prior to the end of the game. At this stage, I'm going to start focusing on the next round of the game. And what that means is that I'm going to try to put myself in a position for next round to really try to clean up the game. Having 7 victory points is pretty strong. If I can amass 2 to 3 next round, I can possibly close out the game. It's going to be a little bit of a stretch, but I should be mindful of what's going on. And maybe I can pull out a win at the end of next round. At this stage, I understand that I can't win the conflict, but the second reward is 5 spice. And really what I'm looking for is to potentially have enough spice to play the Highliner next turn and drop in a massive number of troops. So I know that I'm not going to win this conflict, but I can set myself up for next round and hopefully get a Highliner and win the conflict on the next round. Now on my reveal phase, and having 10 power is great, and I don't care really to add anything more to it, because I just want to get the 5 spice for the next round. With the 1 spice that I have, that's enough to play the Highliner. Now it's time to close out the conflict and get that spice and move on to the next round. As expected, I was able to get the 5 spice that will net me 6 spice for the next round, and I can purchase the Highliner. I'm going to have to get maybe a little bit lucky because I'm not going to have the initiative token, and there's going to be 2 players ahead of me that can potentially play the Highliner. Kind of as expected, the yellow player did pull the Highliner card and is going to give them a pretty massive advantage and drop a bunch of troops into the battlefield. Now, with a lot of the intrigue cards that I have, I do have a ton of combat points in the reserve. I could potentially win still by simply using all those intrigue cards. Gurney Halleck is going to be a great card to play on this round. If I play him on Arakeen, I can net a bunch of troops and do a card draw, which is pretty fantastic. So I can actually drop both my Dreadnoughts and a ton of troops onto the battlefield. Now I have the same combat strength as the yellow player, and I still have all of my intrigue cards in reserve. Plus I have a pretty significant number of cards in my hand as well. So I'm going to keep up the pace. I'm going to try to win this conflict without the Highliner. I think I have a pretty good chance of actually doing that. With 2 more agents to place, if I do this strategically, I can overpower my opponents. One of the things that I'm noticing is that with the Gunthopter, if I place it, I can get rid of troops in the enemy garrisons. Every single opposing player has a troop in the garrison, so that's a good move. They can't put it out onto the battlefield itself, and so that's going to give me a pretty decent advantage. Now I have another intrigue card on top of it, plus more troops in the battlefield. I'm beginning to amass a pretty awesome combat force to take this conflict and hopefully push me into at least 9 points, and maybe I can score an additional 1 point on the way out during this round. So I'm looking to get 1 victory point, possibly from faction. I still have a Bene Gesserit victory point to get if I just get 1 more faction point with them. Thankfully, I have the diplomacy card showing, and there is a Bene Gesserit space that I can go to. My best move is to gain that last faction, and then if I can win the conflict, that's going to be the 3 victory points that I need to win the game. Thankfully, nobody took that position. I'm able to get that victory point. Now I'm at 8. I only need 2 more to win, so it's essential that I win the conflict. In this part right now, I'm just looking at something to trash and then draw some additional cards with. And quite honestly, when I'm looking at things to trash, at this point in time, there really isn't much left in the game, so I can be, I can be pretty open with what I'm trashing. I can get rid of my diplomacy card. Why? Because honestly, I'll probably never be able to play it until the end of the game. Basically, the game is going to come down to this last conflict. If the yellow player wins, they're just going to win the game because they're at 9 victory points. I'm at 8, and I can win the game. Now, one of kind of the wild cards that can happen is that if one of the players has any sort of end game intrigue cards, they can possibly get some additional victory points at the end of the game. This is going to be neck and neck with yellow, so my reveal phase is going to be very telling. I'm at 23, they're at 17. Quite honestly, it doesn't really matter what card I'm drawing. This is probably going to be the end of the game, depending on what actually happens. It's going to be either yellow or myself that wins the game, that's looking to win this conflict. Blue obviously has no chance of winning this at all. Red has a decent number of troops, but they're pretty far behind, so I'm still really worried about yellow. And with that, all of the agents are pretty much placed on the board, so we are headed into that final conflict. Let's see what yellow does. Yellow actually passes. They don't play their intrigue cards, so that means that I basically win the game. I have a ton of intrigue cards in reserve, and if I wanted to, I could really lay them down. I don't actually need to do that because yellow is so far behind. So that's my last 2 victory points for the game, and that's going to give me the win. And put it into the last round of the game, because guess what? I just hit 10, and that's going to terminate the game at the end of the round. So all in all, the X expansion, the digital version of this game, I really enjoy it. I really think it's fantastic. It was only $10 to buy, and I purchased it on Steam. And if you are a Dune Imperium fan, if you're a Dune Imperium player, I do recommend it. I think it was a lot of fun, and it's a good pick. It's a good game to play. For everybody that watched this video, I want to thank you for spending your time. And as always, have fun gaming. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe.